it becomes a particularly difficult point in countries like Russia, where there is no unifying national figure who is beyond politics. When you have deeply, deeply political divides around things like the war in Ukraine, and actually you see people like Putin trying to tap into some of the Queen's popularity by becoming a kind of father of the nation, and it just doesn't work in the same way.
Well, let's have a look now at what the Queen meant to countries that have long since ousted their own monarchs. Let's speak to Gabriel Gavin, who's a journalist based in Armenia, who writes about Russia. Good morning. Hi, Gabriel. Can you hear me?
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning. Good to have you with us. I was quite interested by the warm words that were released by President Putin on the announcement of the death of the Queen. Some people may be surprised that he held her in such high esteem.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a surprisingly generous and warm message in which he talked about her as an important symbol and emphasized the fact that she played such a decisive role throughout history. And what we've seen over the last few months since the start of Russia's war in Ukraine is that any message of any kind that comes from the Russian government is increasingly critical, looks to kind of troll the West and rile people up. But it's very clear that the Kremlin on this occasion didn't take that opportunity, didn't want to incense supporters of the Queen or her family, and issued actually a very muted statement. But I think from personal experience, and there's very limited polling available on this kind of thing, but actually the Queen is a hugely popular figure in Russia and has been since she made the first ever visit of a British head of state to the country since her own relatives were killed by the Bolsheviks. She visited in 1994 and there were huge crowds, people turning out across Moscow, people offering flowers up, looking to try and shake her hand across the barricades. And she really did become a symbol, I think, for people in Russia and across the former Soviet Union of a kind of very different old world understanding of power that harked back to something before the communist revolutions across the former Soviet Union, and kind of stood for, I think, as a symbol that power could be used deferentially, and that it wasn't all about corruption or autocracy, and it stood in sharp contrast, I think, to what people had. And I think she became, therefore, a symbol of liberty and freedom in a way that no one else really could.
It's fascinating how she is viewed by autocratic regimes, whether you're talking about Russia or Turkey. She's seen as a symbol of freedom, something that people don't have necessarily in those countries, yet something that they respect.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think throughout her reign, there have always been people who've said that the monarchy, the idea of a hereditary head of state, is kind of counter to democratic principles. But you look at countries like Russia, you look at countries like Turkey, where any vestige of monarchy has long since been ousted, and you think, are they more democratic because of that? Are they freer because of that? And actually, I think in lots of these places, people often I think, see the Queen as a kind of alternative history of what could have happened to them and to their country if they'd had that transition towards constitutional monarchy. And I think there's always a really powerful symbol in seeing the Queen meet with world leaders. And, you have people who, on an everyday basis, kind of go toe to toe with, the biggest names of the world stage, who command huge armies, who have a nuclear button on their desk. But when they meet the Queen, you can always sense that for any world leader, it's an intimidating, daunting experience. And you have this moment where they have to bow or curtsy to, a 96-year-old great-grandmother. And I think that's a deeply humbling experience for almost any world leader. And I think it reminds people that there's kind of no one has this monopoly on power. No one's infallible. And I think she definitely came to kind of embody that. And I think that's refreshing for people who live in countries where the state is overpowered and has no natural check in the way that the British state has under the monarchy. And I think it also comes down to it becomes a particularly difficult point in countries like Russia, where there is no unifying national figure who is beyond politics. When you have deeply, deeply political divides around things like the war in Ukraine, and actually you see people like Putin trying to tap into some of the Queen's popularity by becoming a kind of father of the nation, and it just doesn't work in the same way.
I want to talk to you as well, Gabriel, if I can. A story on the front page of The Observer, many of the news organisations reporting this morning, about Russian forces in retreat in Ukraine, this counter-offensive in Ukraine. It appears that, it looks like they've gained as much as 50 kilometres into Russian territory over the past few days. That sounds quite significant.
Yeah, it's not so much a retreat as a total rout, I think. What we've seen over the last couple of days, particularly yesterday, is Ukrainian forces are pushing ahead with this massive counteroffensive into the territory that's been occupied by Russians since March in most cases. And it seems as though the Russians have just collapsed. You've got some areas where commanders have pulled out troops and not left anyone there to hold the line. And the Ukrainians have just gone storming through. They've been welcomed with open arms in cities like Izium, Lysychansk, and a series of other towns that have changed hands. On the edge of the Donbass, they're now very much poised to push into this kind of symbolic breakaway Russian proxy-controlled region. And I think what's been really astonishing is that actually, I think the thing that's stopped the thing that's controlled how fast they can move into this territory is not the Russians. It's simply how far they can just get on a daily basis, because they're not encountering huge amounts of resistance by and large. The footage we've seen is all Ukrainian troops on the back of their vehicles rolling into cities, rolling into villages, not of fighting. It seems that the Russians are abandoning positions in lots of places and pulling back to the lines where they have maybe better logistics, better fortifications. And actually, one Russian observer said online that the Ukrainians will clearly fight to the very last man for every village, whereas the Russians won't fight to any man for anything. They're choosing to pull back, take their paycheck, and try not to go home in a body bag.
Gabriel, thank you ever so much for your time this morning. Gabriel Gavin there, a journalist based in Armenia who writes about Russia.